My pronouns are she and her. I'm a junior at Cleveland High School, and I'm first vice president of the NAACP Youth Council. Um, Welcome to the Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action press conference. We will be hearing today from several students, parents, educators, and community leaders about this important movement to stop anti-Blackness in the schools. Our speakers will go for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have about 15 minutes for questions and answers. Also, if you're with the media, please put your name and then what outlet you're with in the chat. And then, so basically I said it earlier, I'm a part of the NAACP Youth Council, and we got started about, I would say 4 years ago. And basically it was only a couple of students from Seattle Public Schools, but with the help of John Greenberg, Sabrina Burr, and Rita Green, we were able to broaden our youth group all the way to, I think, Edmonds. And now we consist of about, I would say 50, maybe 60 members. And now we're able to get compensated for our work. And now I will pass the floor to Jesse.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the 2021 Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action press conference. It's really great to get to join Rena to help host this amazing event with so many powerful students and educators and parents who are going to be talking about this struggle to uproot anti-Blackness in education. And the first week of February is Black Lives Matter at School Week, and there will be thousands of students and teachers and parents here in Seattle participating in this week of action, and there will be many thousands more all across the country. And, you know, this movement started here in Seattle, and it really shouldn't surprise people that this movement started in Seattle, because there is a vicious anti-Blackness and racism in our city that's attacking Black students' minds, and it's attacking their bodies. And that's what our movement is here to address today. You know, you only have to look at the egregious example of View Ridge Elementary School locking up one of their second grade students, their Black student Jaleel, to know the urgency of this movement. The story that broke with KOW was just absolutely heartbreaking, and we're going to hear more about that later in the program. But to put a kid in a cage in school and to train the rest of the kids at the school that this person is less than human is unacceptable. And the disproportionate discipline has been happening in our schools far too often. You see the outrageous report, and this beautiful soul who was put away and instead of nurtured and supported, our school system far too often tries to dispose of our Black youth. And, you know, it's not just Jaleel, it's a whole school to prison pipeline that's happening, not just in Seattle, but around the country. And it blows my mind that this city, this county, can find $200 million to lock away our beautiful young children, but can't find the money for a nurse in every school during a time of a pandemic, right? I mean, that's the contradictions that we're facing in the Seattle public schools. And it's systemic, right? It's not just the one incident of Jaleel being abused. It is something that's happening every day in our schools, where our youth are seen as disposable rather than beautiful souls to nurture. And we see a school system that's more interested in shipping them into the school to prison pipeline and locking them away than unlocking their minds and their potential. And the disparities continue to persist, right? So we know that, in fact, you know, our Black students are most disproportionately suspended. And that's why this movement exploded back in 2016, as a response to this anti-Blackness in education, but also the broader Black Lives Matter movement. And it should just be noted before I pass it back to Rena that this movement erupted at John Muir Elementary School, where some incredible educators like Deshaun Jackson helped to organize an event. And this was the summer after Alton Sterling and Philando Castile were murdered by police. And the educators there wanted to nurture their youth and let them know they were loved, and organized an event to have Black families and community members high five all the youth on the way into the school that day. And if you'll remember, the art teacher, Julie Trout, made this beautiful shirt for all the educators to wear. And then white supremacists started bombarding the school with hate mail. And then a particularly hateful person made a bomb threat against John Muir Elementary School just because they wanted to support their Black youth. And the school district officially canceled that event. They brought in bomb sniffing dogs that morning. And it was heartbreaking. You know, the incredible staff there went through with the event anyway, but it was much smaller than it would have been. And so a bunch of us, many folks who are participating in this press conference right now, helped to bring the John Muir staff together and think about what we could do to support them. And that year is when we passed the resolution in our union for Black Lives Matter at School Day, October 19th, and partnering with the Seattle Council PTSA and many Black student unions and the NAACP, we built a campaign, and over 3,000 teachers came to school wearing this shirt on October 19th, and many teaching lessons about institutional racism. And you can see this is from that first week of action, that first day of action that occurred, right? And now it's turned into a national movement thanks to the amazing educators in Philadelphia who took it from a day of action and expanded it to a week of action and broke down the 13 principles of the Black Lives Matter Global Network into teaching points for each day of the week. So if you go to blacklivesmatteratschool.com, you can find out all the information about how we've gone from a day of action to a week of action to now what we're calling the year of purpose. Every month has a different day of action all throughout the school year, and encouraging educators and parents and students to participate in really a lifetime of practice about transforming our schools. So I want to just share with you all the video that we made about this movement, and then we're going to hear from our first speaker.
What is happening in our schools today is heartbreaking.
This is one of the racist rants discovered Monday at Oak Park River Forest High School.
Our kids are being called the N-word. We have white students who think it's okay to come to school for Halloween with a KKK mask.
1.6 million children in this country go to a school where there's a police officer but no counselor.
Educators in Washington State are 90% white.
I'm not getting the education that I need as a Black male.
The people who have done the conquering have been the ones that we've been lauding in school.
Kobe, who's in the 9th grade at Pearland High School, was studying immigration when he read this in his...
Oh, sorry.
What is happening in our schools today?
When he read this in his textbook, a comment that referenced African slaves as workers.
All I ever see is us being slaves, you know? Like, why don't you ever teach me, you know, how we fought back? Because I know my people are strong.
A referee at a high school wrestling match in New Jersey told a wrestler he had to cut his dreadlocks or forfeit the match.
I see people around me who are hurt, and it is wrong to not speak up.
Black Lives Matter at School is a declaration that Black students deserve to be taught the truth and that their lives have value.
It gives students, not only of color, but of other races and ethnicities, a chance to see different cultures.
We have lessons for every single day, Monday through Friday. So
So there's about 2 to 3 principals per day that are connected.
We participated in this last year, and a lot of feedback we got from educators who have never really experienced ethnic studies in the classroom was that their students were more engaged in this content than they had ever seen before.
I learned so much through that really empowered me as a Black man. This is probably the first time I really was excited about school. You know, it's something that I'm passionate about now.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. I hope you have a better understanding of the origins of this movement. And Rena, if you can introduce our first speaker.
Just a note before I do, all speakers try to keep it to 2 to 3 minutes. And if you do make that 3-minute mark, I will be just reminding you it's time to wrap it up. But the first person we have is Alexis.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Alexis Baru. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a sophomore at Foster High School in Tukwila, Washington. No problem. I was going through, or I was writing my statement for the press release a few weeks ago or last week, and something that stood out in like kind of the call our ask of that press release was, why is it important to talk about Black Lives Matter at school during COVID? And I really hadn't thought of the connection between Black Lives Matter and COVID in depth. Obviously, we know that there was a lot of uprising this past summer during the pandemic and the quarantine. And, you know, I really just thought it was a coincidence. But in talking with other youth activists and people who had thought about this a little bit more deeply, someone had said something along the lines of the fact that everything that happens, like Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, that happened this summer was a real wake-up call, because no one had the distractions of regular life to keep them from taking action or realizing what was going on. And when they said that, that was like a mind-blowing moment, because I'd never thought of that. And when I really digested their words, I realized that it was 100% true. And even for myself, I really, I think along with me being older and just being more aware of my surroundings and society, as well as being at home and only having the news and only having social media, and it was summer, so I wasn't in school, it lit something within me that really showed this is where I should be. This is where I should be. I should be in the streets. I should be protesting. I should be doing more than I have in the past when I wasn't able to, or I wasn't aware because I was younger. And so I think that when we talk about COVID and Black Lives Matter at school, it's important that people know that Black Lives Matter at school and Black Lives Matter in general, this should be shouted from the rooftops, no matter what time it is, no matter what day it is, no matter what time of year it is, because Black Lives Matter, Black lives always matter, no matter the conditions. And we see that even in the best of the best or the worst of the worst conditions of the world, Black lives are still under attack, and we must fight to make sure that everyone knows Black Lives Matter. And so I think that when we talk about social uprising, we do need to accompany it with the current climate, because it does play a huge role in how things will move forward.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate that, Alexis. And our next speaker is Angelina. And, you know, we talked about some very difficult things our movement is facing. Angelina is one of the leaders that has helped make the school system very much better for youth, including the campaign around removing police from the schools that she helped to organize. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, when I think about Black Lives Matter at school, and I just think about like its impact, it's like we're looking again at the reprise of the movement, or I say reprise just because not because Black people forgot about it, but because I think white America forgot about it over the past few years. But especially last year after the after the murder of George Floyd and the murders of Breonna Taylor, and just the countless protests that had happened. I think it's just such a pivotal moment for us to really like say that in our institutions. Today I was catching up on homework from like months ago that I was just like too busy to like worry about at the time, and I had missed the whole unit on Brown versus the Board of Education, and I was doing all the readings and doing all the research for a project, and just seeing what Black Lives Matter meant in our schools. I mean, I was writing an essay and I started with the fact that Black Lives Matter, or just this initial civil rights movement, did not start in the 1960s. It did not end in the 1970s, as so many people say. It started as soon as our ancestors were being pulled onto slave ships. It started when we were getting kidnapped and brought to different parts of the world, and it exists, just the very moral, or not moral, but everything that is white centrist, everything that is white supremacy exists today, and it exists in our educational institutions, and plays a major role in how Black people live, and even how non-Black BIPOC folks live and exist in the different intersections that exist in races, and it's just there's no proper way to really explain how important it is. I mean, I think being a Black person and seeing it and living it is one thing, and then just trying to have to constantly prove it to the rest of the world is another really difficult topic.
Thank you, Angelina. The next person we'll have is Tracy Castro-Gill.
Thanks, Rena, and thanks everyone for having me here today. So I'm the executive director and co-founder of a new 501c4 nonprofit organization, Washington Ethnic Studies Now. We just incorporated in the spring of 2020. And since then, the demand for our services, which is mostly professional development and consulting, is beyond my capacity to meet. That's how hungry educators and students and families are for anti-racist education in our state. Unfortunately, another component of my job is advocating at the state level now for ethnic studies and anti-racist education. And I'm seeing all of the holes that exist, right? The more and more people learn about my organization, the more I'm hearing stories from educators of color, BIPOC educators from districts outside of Seattle, from inside Seattle, about the abuse they're experiencing at the hands of district administrators. And I know there's a big push to, put the students first, but the research all indicates that educators of color, Black educators, Latinx educators especially, have such an important role to play in education and delivering ethnic studies content and Black studies content. And we just don't have the systems in place to support those educators. In fact, we tend to, as a society, punish the educators who come forward and do the right thing and who are anti-racist. For example, Jackie Flaherty, who blew the whistle on the View Ridge situation where they were locking students in cages, was experiencing retaliation for years. She held on to that story and sat on it for at least 2 years because she was being retaliated against, and she was afraid of coming forward. She was afraid of losing her job. She's a veteran educator, a Black woman. And she is not the exception. She is the rule. This is what happens to educators of color when we try to support our students of color. And so I'm advocating at local and state levels for more BIPOC decision-making. We have an OSPI effort to create a statewide ethnic studies model curriculum where most of the people on the committee are either white or have never taught ethnic studies and don't understand it. They're having to train up these people in order to write a model curriculum for the state. And so we're pushing back on that as our organization, Washington Ethnic Studies Now. We just have to, Black Lives Matter, ethnic studies, Black studies, it's only as good as the people and systems that are in place to implement it. And right now we're not there. Seattle Public Schools, educators of color are running away from Seattle Public Schools as fast as they can. And the district wants to brag about how they're recruiting educators of color, but push them on the retention. What's the retention rate? Because I know so many educators who can't wait to get out of Seattle Public Schools. And it's like that across the state. I'm hearing more and more people come forward asking me, for advice. How do I deal with this? How do I implement ethnic studies? An educator in Renton was punished for doing a land acknowledgement in her classroom, right? An educator in Kitsap County was punished. A Black queer educator was punished for having a Black Lives Matter sign up in her background while she was doing virtual teaching, right? So, we have to approach this from a systems level. And I'm so grateful to the youth, and I work with the NAACP Youth Council as frequently as I can because they teach me, and they're amazing. And it's shameful that the adults who are making the decisions are forcing our students into this position to fight for their lives. So I'm here to advocate for educators of color. I'm here to push those of us who are in decision-making positions to do better and be better. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Tracy. Next, we'll have Chiweta.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Chiweta Clement. I go to Middle High School. I'm a junior and I go by she, her pronouns. I'm going to speak on this, but I have to turn off my camera because every time I speak, the mic just glitches. And what I have to say is really important. So I'm just going to turn off my camera, okay? My first point to the subject of why should schools attend the Black Lives Matter Week of Action is why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't the school want their Black students to feel represented in a society that constantly degrades Black women and men? In March and April, we looked on the news, another Black man was getting shot because the police didn't want to do their job. Another Black woman was getting shot because the police didn't want to do their job pertaining to Black people. And school is the first place where students can learn about the Black Lives Matter movement. School is where we grow up. We go to school since we were 5 years old until we're pushing 40. That's where you're supposed to learn about Black lives. It's important to help students feel safe, especially in a society that constantly pushes them down to the point where they don't feel safe. It's actually a bit sad to me that we even have to have this conversation. We already have to separate a week, just a week, for schools to help include Black history, Black figures into their lessons, and it's optional. It's optional to do this. It's not mandatory. Some of the teachers don't even follow the lesson plans that's given to them, and that's really disappointing. First of all, it's already a week long and it's not a year long. If it was a year long, this would be a whole different conversation. There should be no reason for schools to have a problem with the Black Lives Matter Week of Action. It's essential for students all over the world to learn about the Black Lives Matter movement. We constantly saw people rioting, protesting, and there's so many different opinions because Black lives matter. I don't know why it's a conversation between some people that Black lives are being put first over other races. If you have 4 kids and one of the kids are hurt, who are you going to go help first? The kid that's hurt. And Black people are constantly hurt all the time. That's why that we need to focus. That's why we need to focus with them in the schools. Just like I said, it's essential for students to learn about the Black Lives Matter movement and not only the tokenized parts of the Black lives. As said in the videos, all we see is Black people being put as slaves, being put as reprimanded by their white counterparts, barely even counterparts because white people are very much superior in this society. But that's all we learn about. We learn about slaves. We learn about Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and that's it. We don't learn about any other Black figures. We don't learn about any other Black achievements. We just learn about those 2 people when there's thousands of other Black people fighting for our rights every single day. Districts have to make it make sense. How is it not optional to attend Washington State history that's filled with whitewashed, sugar-coated history, but not optional to learn about ethnic studies? How is it not optional to learn about white scientists, white artists, white authors, white poets every year, every class period, every hour, every lesson plan? But it's optional to learn about Black scientists, Black artists, Black authors, Black poets, etc. Black students are in a school to learn about a curriculum that's meant for white students, but the curriculum is built on the years, the blood, and shed by our Black ancestors. It's honestly beyond me that we even have to have this conversation. I would like y'all to ask yourselves, why wouldn't I want an environment that helps Black students feel safe, included, and represented in a society that is used to seeing Black dead bodies on the news? Ask yourself that. And then you would understand what I'm saying. School districts have to participate in the Black Lives Matter Week of Action because it's necessary to learn about the lives of Black people. Just like I said beforehand, we have to learn about the lives of white people. Every class period, every lesson, every science class, every English class, we learn about the same people, the same whitewashed history lessons. But when it comes to Black lives, we learn about slaves. Reciprocate the same energy. So why does the energy change when it comes to this week? It comes to this week, the energy changes. It flips. We have to have a conversation about it because there's people arguing against it.
Thank you so much for those powerful words. You're absolutely right. And it's incredible to see young people fighting for a different kind of education system and curriculum. And Bethel Getu is one of those students, Seattle Public Schools student. Bethel, can you talk to us today? Is Bethel there? Okay, maybe we'll come back to Bethel. I'll invite Amijah to join us. Amijah is a Seattle Public Schools parent, community queen, an advocate for children and especially Black children. Thank you so much for joining us, Amijah.
Thank you. Hopefully you guys can hear me clearly. I just want to say thank you for the invite. I'm very humbled and honored to be in this space. For those who are new to me, Majah Smith, but I go by Majah. And if you're also new to me, relax, but I'm gonna just be 100% transparent. I'm really here about Black children, Black families, Black community. One thing about the Black culture, extending from our African culture, is that we're very much welcoming all. The diaspora is filled with many different backgrounds. So it's really not to exclude, but I'm going to focus on the community and the purpose that we're here to talk about today. So just want to say, keeping it Black, man, Black, let's not water it down. People of color, let's not water it down. Black studies. I thank everybody who wants to bring forth ethnic studies, but I'm talking about Black studies, African-American studies. Let's put that first. I say all that. I just was in a lesson with my son yesterday evening, doing history and talking about enslavement and slavery and how they were watering that down and how that really does hurt the spirit. It hurt my whole family. And it's like, how do I help my son with this curriculum, to be honest, without him then being retaliated, or they think that he didn't take his test himself, even though my children have been coming through and learning about anti-racism in their community and their ancestry since they were in preschool. So I just want to first highlight that. I just want to also highlight that we have to stay woke. It's very important that we have to stay woke and we have to be unapologetic about our Black community, be pro-Black, because the anti-Blackness is so embedded in the air that we breathe. So some of us don't even realize that we've normalized it and think that it's just the average normal way to be and walk through the world. And so as soon as somebody come to you and try to wake you up, then people get offended, and that's across race. But it's time to do more and be more. So I really am happy to hear about the Year of Purpose. I think that's wonderful to incorporate it and extending it out. I want to kind of highlight the Jalil situation, which really gives me pain and puts something in my body every time I think about it, because it's an example of how Seattle Public Schools and other not all schools, private schools, whatever school, how they really don't value our children, how they do think, go ahead and put them in a cage and that's okay. And then normalize the culture, not only in that school, but within our system, to watch that. Yes, there is retaliation to all, because if the mother was up there and gave hell, if I was just up there and just walked through the school, I would have said something. There is retaliation, and oftentimes it comes on our families by making our voices silent, pushing us out the school. Then we're scared of what's happening to our children, and maybe that mother did, I don't know. I can't speak for that family, but it's unfortunate that the retaliation is so so real and so fierce. And I've experienced myself as a parent, a staunch advocate every day, dropping my kids off every day, and how across race, they'll try to push and silence your voice, threaten you, call the police if you come back up here and you ain't even cuss nobody out. If you're gonna do all that, at least let me cuss you out or something. But what I'm trying to say is that we gotta stay consistent. It's not for the weary. Our community and our people have been fighting, as Angelina said from the beginning, and just be unapologetic about it, please, because there's no time to fall back. And we are afraid of a retaliation, but we have to get over that as well. We have to step into our courage and we have to step into our boldness around this for the sake of our children. We have to put our children first. We have to put our children first. If you're an educator or somebody and you're afraid to speak up for a child, a 7-year-old, an elementary student, a preschooler, a kindergartner, then you have to question yourself, or you have to go ahead and garner more support to support you through that process, because the sacrifice falls on our children in these schools. The sacrifice falls on our children. There's third graders thinking about committing suicide. Who has to help that child without the mental health support? The families do. And so I just want to say, this is awesome. I appreciate it is a first step and a third step, but we have to be prepared to do more. And we have to be prepared to not water it down. That's my call of action today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we'll have Erin Herrera.
Hi, it's Erin Herda. I work in the Tukwila School District, and I'm a parent of South Shore Pre-K-8 students. So when John asked me to talk, I was really thinking through how white educators need to approach this. And when we don't approach it as white educators, we make it seem like Black Lives Matter in school is an option, and it's not an option. It's mandatory. It's about humanity. And as an ethnic studies teacher, we teach about the collective, and we talk about, the 13 principles help all of our students. So why would we leave those out? I think that when white teachers aren't teaching Black Lives Matter, it harms our Black students, and it's a disservice to all of our students. It perpetuates anti-Blackness in our education systems. And I think that as a white educator, we have to take those risks that our privilege grants us to push for these initiatives in our schools, because retaliation will be less towards me. We're a majority of the workforce, and so we need to be bringing this into all of our classrooms. As white parents, we need to be asking our teachers how they're incorporating Black Lives Matter in school and making that known that that's important to us. As white administrators, you need to support your staff in doing the work, and also a directive of we will do Black Lives Matter Week of Action, Year of Purpose, Ethnic Studies, making it the improvement plan, right? Putting it at the center, because we have all of these policies and resolutions, but if they're not put into action, they don't mean anything. And so following up our documents that show that we're trying to be anti-racist, we need to actually put that to work in the classrooms, in the office, in our communities.
Thank you.
And I
Erin.
have the pleasure to work with Alexis as the race and equity facilitator for our district.
Excellent. Oh, we appreciate you joining us. Thank you, Erin. Next up, we're going to hear from Sabrina Burr, who's the Seattle Council PTSA Strategic Advisor and an amazing parent and organizer. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jesse. I'm also Rena Mataja's mom, so I'm going to put that brag there. In 2016, when I first joined this movement, it was Jesse and Wayne and John and Rita Green and many others. I was then the Seattle Council PTSA president. And why that was significant is during the John Muir story that Jesse talked about, as we were working with the then superintendent, Dr. Nyland, and the small cabinet, Seattle Public Schools didn't know which way to move. And with the work of Seattle Council by their side, we told them we have no other choice, that we have to move. And that's what made Seattle Public Schools put their feet in. And I think it's very important, but I want to give everybody one name as I talk about PTA. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. If you do not know who she is, you need to know who she is. She was born free in 1825, Baltimore, Maryland. She was a poet and an abolitionist, and she was a founding member of the National Congress of Mothers in 1897, now known as PTA. So I want to give that piece of history, and please, everybody look her up, read her poetry, and that's something that we need to know. We need to lift up Black people who have been in the work since the beginning. We forget that Black people were free in the 1800s, and we want to make it as a side note, but all throughout the global history and American history are Black people. We are not an add-on. What we need to be talking about is talking about the truth of American history. And that's why this is so important. I'm glad that we moved from a day to a week and to have a year of purpose. But it's so important that we make sure that this is not an add-on. I was glad to see Seattle Public Schools putting Black studies, ethnic studies, and Indigenous studies as a part of their participatory budgeting. Because if we don't put it in the line item for the dollars, then it doesn't matter. So we have to talk about that because that's very important as well. And we need to make sure that in all classrooms, a lot of white people and other people who don't have to walk in dark and Black skin, they are uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. And I charge all of you to start being comfortable with being uncomfortable, because every day Black children have to learn to be uncomfortable. Black mothers and fathers have to learn to be uncomfortable. And so we need to walk together. This is not an add-on. Our history books are wrong and we need to correct this. Another thing that I want to talk about is we talk about what educators need to teach. This is a perfect opportunity to let a Black youth, even in elementary school, design a curriculum and teach it. This is a time for the students to be teachers as well. This is a time for change, and we must start telling the truth. And so I'm glad for a year of purpose, but I think that we need to make sure that Black lives are celebrated, told the truth about. We will never know all the great things that Black people have done for this world, and especially for the United States, because so much of our work, so much of our writing was co-opted by other people. But now it's time to tell the truth and to tell the story. And I'll end with this. Delbert Richardson does the Traveling History Museum, and it's American history. And one year we had his display there, and it was just the information there. And we had Black students, Asian students, white students, Native students starting to teach each other because the truth was there. We need to expose everybody to the truth, because Black Lives Matter 365 days, and not only in the United States, but throughout the globe. And that's what we need to start normalizing.
Thank you for your words. Next, we'll have Brandon Hersey.
Thank y'all very much. I hope y'all can hear me well. I don't want to take much time just because I want to make sure that we can get through as many students as possible. As a school board director for Seattle Public Schools, one of the things that I find myself in awe of is every time I get to share space, not only with the NYC Youth Council, but the many other Black and POC-led student groups that our district is just so fortunate to have. All I can say is that as a message to other electeds and other folks in decision-making power, what I would say is the more you can share that power, and not just share, but hand over that power to these youth, the better outcomes we are going to have for our system. It is because of these youth that we are discussing the potential to end restraint and isolation as a practice in our district. It is because of of these youth that Seattle Public Schools has severed our relationship with the Seattle Police Department. It is because of these youth that we are working toward youth representation on our board in a significant way. And one thing that I take very seriously is that we reach the best outcomes when we are able to get out of the way as electeds and as adults and as decision makers and turn as much power as possible over to the youth who experience our system every single day. We have not only a responsibility to support them, but our greater responsibility is to make sure that they have the tools and the power and the resources in order to support themselves, not only now, but as they grow and move into whatever comes next for them. So I will leave you with that. Thank you so much for the time. And again, I am so blessed and so honored to share space with everyone here.
Thank you, Director Hersey. Now we're going to hear from Gerald Hankerson, the president of the NAACP's Alaska, Oregon, Washington State Conference, fighter from the beginning in this struggle and a good friend. So Gerald, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I knew you was going to be the one because I told you that I was not willing to speak. I want to be here in support, as everyone have said, that my role here is to be there in support of our youth, because after all, that's who we are fighting for, because I used to be that youth as well. So just for them to know that I'm listening and I'm learning from them. So you have the lead and we will follow. I'm glad you're doing this, and thank you for all of your work.
Thank you. Thank you for being here and for learning from our youth like we all have. You know, it's an honor to be in the struggle with everybody who spoke to try to transform this school system, and it's desperately needed. I just want to highlight the demands that we have before we open it up for questions. You know, our first demand is around ending zero tolerance discipline and replacing it with restorative justice. We've seen that powerful transformation at schools like Rainier Beach and Cleveland High School that have dramatically turned around suspension rates and increased graduation rates by treating kids as human beings that need support rather than punishing, pushing out, and locking up. And our second demand is hire more Black teachers. And we also want to recognize what Tracy said. We also need to retain them, right, and support them. And one of the things that Amijah and I worked on over the summer of the Black Education Now rally, Amijah pointed out that if this city really wanted to retain Black teachers, there would be subsidized housing for Black educators who can't afford to live in Seattle. And the city could replace some of the bloated police budget with a budget to help Black educators afford to live in this city. And there's a lot of studies that show the benefits of having Black educators in the system, including a recent study that showed that Black students graduated from 30% higher rates when they had even one Black teacher in their elementary school years. You know, we have a demand for Black studies and for ethnic studies because we know our kids are being lied to by these textbooks. We know they're being lied to by the corporate curriculum that has hidden the contributions and the struggles of Black people in this country. And we also know that students that take Black studies and ethnic studies courses do so much better. The study out of San Francisco, when students were in ethnic studies classes, showed a dramatic increase in graduation rates. And we have the demand of fund counselors, not cops. And it's incredible to be with the youth today that put the petition together. They got some 14,000 signatures in just a few days that helped put pressure on the school district, on the city to remove police. And, you know, that was a victory for our struggle. And now the next phase is actually replacing those police with a nurse in every school, with school psychologists, with counselors, and all the supports our youth need. Those are the 4 national demands. And locally, we've added fully fund education and end high stakes standardized testing. And that's what we're really in the struggle for. I'll just end by saying that The week of action during the first week of February is going to have a few different events to celebrate Black Lives in Schools. We're putting together a read aloud on Monday, February 1st, to have for elementary school youth to learn about important Black figures that often get overlooked. So we're going to have a read aloud on Thursday at 12:30. That's Thursday, February 4th at 12:30. We're going to do a book event. I co-edited this book, Black Lives Matter at School: An Uprising for Educational Justice, with Denisha Denisha Jones, and we're going to be joining Black Lives Matter co-founder Opal Tometi in a book conversation with some youth as well. And on Friday, we have the Young, Gifted, and Black Student Talent Showcase, and I just put that link for it in the chat. Everybody should RSVP. Everybody should show up and see these brilliant Black artists and speakers share their talents with the world. So with that, I want to open it up. And are there any questions from any of the?
I've got a question, I guess, if people are with that. I'd love to hear from some of the students.
Can you just introduce yourself and what news outlet you're in? And
yeah, thanks for that. So my name's Ari McKenna. I write about education for the South Seattle Emerald. And I was a teacher for a long time. And I think that only in the last few years that I was teaching was, Black Lives Matter Week. Did it come into being? And I'm curious, what that feels like for students to have something that is clearly being created by you and like-minded educators for your, and where for different things going on, but maybe not so directly focused on advancing your needs in the education system.
yeah, any of the youth want to speak to that? What does it feel like to be part of this week?
I can speak briefly. It's for me very eye-opening as far as like when you can have teachers who claim to be this, that, or the third. They can claim to support Black Lives Matter or support all their students, but if Black Lives Matter, prove it, and here's a way to prove it. Now I know, okay, this teacher, they're actually putting effort into this. This teacher, they're proving it, and then this other teacher, what are they doing? And so it's really eye-opening to see who's on not your side, but who's doing their part. And if you're not doing your part, then that's just momentum and motivation to really check that teacher and question, why aren't you doing your part?
Can I go?
Yes, please.
Okay. I really am excited and I'm really happy that there is stuff going on in the background, and there's actually people putting in the work to make sure that BIPOC students, especially Black students, have a safe space, because obviously we do not. I can speak for myself and for others by saying we do not have a safe space at school. The school to prison pipeline is disgusting, and I can't believe it still goes on in 2021. School cannot be a safe space for students. We cannot feel safe when we have police officers, grown men with weapons. That ratio is just disgusting to me, and I've always thought that there's nothing going on in the background and we just have to deal with it until I joined NYC. And now I really got to see that there are people putting in the work to make it different, and that gives me hope, because I have a younger brother who is Black, and he already faced racial injustice, and I don't know if I can handle anymore, because that's my brother, and people need to understand, especially some teachers who choose to ignore Black Lives Matter, who choose to not put in the efforts to teach us during Black History Month, to just absolutely ignore what's happening out in the world, that Black student, they're someone's brother, they're someone's cousin, like they're humans too. And I feel like people tend to forget that sometimes. And to add on to what Alexis said, absolutely, it's like if you claim that you care, then do something about it. There's obviously offers, there's movements going around. So it's like if you're a teacher and you claim that you care, do something about it. So it is an eye opener.
Thank you so much, Ida. Excellent. Are there any other? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was about to say the same thing that you were saying. I was about to ask if there was any more questions from the press to go ahead and ask them.
I'll go. This is Jen. I'm from the Seattle Times and new here to this community. And as many of you have mentioned, a lot of this work has been going on for a while, and that you are saying that it shouldn't be an option for schools anymore. I was curious, in your minds, both from a teacher perspective and a youth perspective, what does accountability look like? What do you think should be done to hold people more accountable to their policies?
Can I answer this question?
Please.
For me personally, it's like, because now we're in a time where there's trends. So like it's what's trendy. And one thing that I really noticed is during the summer when we had the uprisings, there were a lot of people who said Black Lives Matter, but half of them just posted it on a black square with the hashtag and nobody did anything after that. So for me, when it comes to accountability, it's not teachers teaching, it's teachers teaching the truth. Because we know that Black people were enslaved and we know that all the horrible things that we went through, but they failed to teach about how we were kings and how we were queens and how we had dynasties before this and how we created the math system, we created writing. Everything that we have right now, almost 100% of it Black people created. They failed to let us know that if it wasn't for Black women, there probably wouldn't be as many white people because we used to breastfeed their babies. They don't let us know that Black people would get lynched for nothing and they would take their hands and their shirts and their clothes and their hair as souvenirs. And still to this day, if there's an antique chair sitting in your living room and you cut it open, you'll probably find some Black people remains in there because that's how vicious it was during that time. And they don't let us know that, and they don't give us the real truth and the unraw, uncut history. And that's why so many times, especially now, everything is starting to be repeated because they're afraid that if we know what we're truly capable of, then we'll truly come together as one. And that's why when back in those times, they want us to have knowledge because they knew once we tapped into that, we will become unstoppable. And still hide in the public and in they even create these. So I feel like taking accountability would be sharing the actual truth and letting people know that if it wasn't for Black people, there would be no world when you really think about it.
Thank you.
I want to answer from the teacher perspective on what accountability looks like.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So I want to remind us what Amijah said about students committing suicide because of racial trauma that they're experiencing in the schools. And we have data on that. We've collected data on that. And even students who don't go as far as committing suicide, the depression, the self-loathing that comes with internalized depression because you're being told at every single turn in your school that you are not worthy. That's abuse and that's trauma. And if a teacher hits a student or calls a student names, they're disciplined. But if a teacher commits a racist act against a student, there's no accountability. What is the difference? What is the difference Teachers are literally physically and emotionally abusing students without any accountability whatsoever. In fact, teachers are calling the police on students and then filing harassment claims against other people for calling them out on it, right? So these teachers who are committing racist acts aren't only not being held accountable, they're being protected by the system and the policies that exist currently, not only in the school districts and the teachers union too. The teachers union is just as complicit as the school districts. So there needs to be policy on both sides of the coin, by the districts and the teachers union. I know WEA is working on it, but there's so much resistance from more rural districts, especially on doing that. And so I think we just have to redefine how we see racism and acts of racism as trauma and as abuse instead of racism. It's trauma and abuse. It's racial trauma and abuse.
Yeah, and I would just add that the accountability has to go all the way to the top, because the Seattle School District was informed that Jaleel was being locked in the cage, and they conducted an investigation and then concluded that that was okay to lock away a child in a cage. That is outrageous. And you know, Black Lives Matter at school is not going to rest until there is accountability for school district officials that create an environment where it's safe to lock away Black kids. And you know, that just hurts my heart that that child will forever be impacted by that and will have the trauma of having been locked away. But it's also outrageous that the white students who walked by and laughed and saw him were given the message that that was okay. And so, yeah, we've seen it far too many times where whether it's racist pedagogy or physical abuse, when it's occurring against Black students, there is no accountability, and that has to change.
Jesse,
May I follow up?
Yes.
I just want to jump in real quick.
Who are you calling on, Jesse?
I was talking real quick. If you can
Sabrina
finish up
and
after me.
Elijah, you both should go next. So I don't know who wants to go.
And then Amijah can go. I think I jumped in first. One of the things that I need to say is in that school, Jaleel was not the only one. It was a school culture, and too many students have been harassed in that school. So when that Jaleel story came out, there was 5 families we were talking about. We have to stop these school cultures because it happens as a culture in the school. This is not just one incident that was horrific to one student. It was horrific, but it was what was going on in the culture of that school was happening to many students. And when you find one story, you need to look at the culture of the school. And yes, it does go all the way to the top, but we have to stop it. One student being abused is one student too many. And we have to look at the whole system because that whole school needs some help and some repair.
Thank you. Amijah?
Yeah, definitely support what Sabrina's saying, that the school culture is a reflection of the district's culture. But what I want to add as a first educator, our parents are the first educators of our children. We're doing remote learning right now, so our families are still educating our children. And I also just want to speak for those of us who are supplementing education for our children, myself as one of those, since my children went into public schools and kindergarten, being aware that the curriculum and the environment and the culture was just not sufficient, but it was what I had to do at the time as a parent. So when I think about accountability, I really think there's accountability to hold the districts, the schools, whomever accountable to ensure that our students are having a successful quality education. But then there's the accountability back to the community. So if you're saying you're going to offer this excellent education and this is the best place you should be, because if you don't show up, you're late too many times, or you're absent, then they're going to try to send you to family court. But if that's the case, then how do you know that you're doing a good job with the families? You have to check back in with those families. You have to engage with with the Black families to ensure, and accountability also means taking leadership from Black families, Black mothers, Black fathers, and also hearing from the youth, is this working for you? Because if it's not working, then we have to do something different. And I think that we don't have to start doing that because the children, the students, the families have already spoken. It's not working for us. It's not working for us. So do something different. And that is what accountability looks like, as well as holding or trying to discipline a system that is really embedded. Like, we have to be willing to teach the whole community and everyone that race is a social construct that's not real, first and foremost. And what is it? What are we leveraging? Who gets resources and who doesn't? So accountability also means sharing the resources, giving the resources to the Black community, allowing the Black community to educate and pour into our community and our families as we know best, so that we can be prepared to make sure our students are graduating, that they're successful, and that they're meeting the goals that they're striving for. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Marjorie.
I would like to say something too. Okay, my name is Chiwata again. I'm in the corner. I'm gonna turn off my camera because every time I speak, the mic does something else. But what accountability looks like to me, since I was a kid, bullying. The whole bullying from a kid, there were steps. If you were caught bullying, there were steps. There was punishments. There was things that would happen if you bullied somebody or if you reported yourself getting bullying. But when it comes to the N-word or any discriminatory actions, there's nothing. There's nothing. At my school, personally, the pledge that was there was nothing that talked about talked about race. There's nothing that talked about discriminatory actions and racist actions. Nothing until the youth at my school stepped up and made something happen, because since nobody wants to advocate for us, since the people that are harassing us doesn't want to say something, we had to say something and step up and change the pledge. So accountability looks like to me, if nobody's held accountable, then the actions are going to continue. We're talking about trauma. We're talking about helping our students, but you don't want to correct the students that's destroying the trauma of the other students. Many teachers and colleagues need to call their fellow teachers and colleagues out. You're going to be watching another teacher harass a student and not say anything. Who does that make you? Just like someone just said, the school culture represents the school district. So how are students going to be a part of a school when one action will be very much accountable, very much suspended, very much expelled, but one other action is swept under the rug? Swept under the rug because the school wants to look good. What does that say about you? What does that do to your students? It ruins their mental health completely, because racial incidents run deeper. They run deeper, especially when you're in a society that thinks it's okay. They think it's okay, and they rub it under the rug like nothing happens. And that's what accountability looks like to me. Running it to the top, just like someone just said.
Thank you.
Can I say something real quick?
Yeah.
To add on to what she said, as someone who experienced bullying from a young age because of my hair or because I, quote unquote, I look like a monkey, not one of the white students that literally harassed me every single day ever got in trouble. Never. But I remember when I did stand up for myself, I got pulled to the office and I was told that I'm bullying them. Yeah. This is how they silence us. They don't want us to speak up. And the minute we do speak up, they will turn the table to make it seem like we're the problem. And on top of that, the stereotypical of we're thugs, we're this, we're that, we're this. The fact that teachers, not even the administration, they want the school to look squeaky clean, like it's loving and accepting, that they will sweep anything and everything under the rug. They do not care about us. And if they did, if the school system really cared about us like they said they would, the generation before us wouldn't have went through this. The generation before the generation wouldn't have went through this. And the fact that we're still going through this in 2021 it just shows that they don't give a fuck. If they did, there would have been change. And accountability, not pronouncing the word right. It looks like when students come confide in the administration or teachers that they're being harassed, that there is action, getting taken right away. Don't wait it out. Depression is real. Mental illness is real. Anxiety is real. But for some reason, people don't take it serious when they see it at BIPOC students.
Ida, thank you so much for sharing that pain and trauma with us. I know that's hard to do, and it's important also, when possible, to really show what's happening in these schools that's got to change. Powerful words. Thank you so much. Rena, did you want to?
I was just checking to see if there was any more questions that anybody else had.
We can take a last question from the media if there's any other media here that had a question.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
This is Aaron Allen from the Seattle Medium newspaper. I'd like to know a little bit, how does restorative justice play into all of this? Is it to be taught, or is it about the accountability, or how is restorative justice playing in the Black Lives Matter in education?
I can speak on that. Yeah, so restorative justice in our schools. Sorry, can y'all hear me? I'm getting like feedback.
I can hear it.
Okay, sorry. It was like really weird. Yeah, but restorative justice in our schools, I think we were talking about this a lot last summer when the campaign to expel Seattle Police Department from Seattle Public Schools had occurred, and there was a conversation after the voting was finalized on what our next steps looked like, and the conversation around restorative justice came about, and there's been several meetings and several workshops where we've had community members come in, we've had experts come in and discuss how to best implement that into our schools. And so when we think about or just looking historically, or just looking in general, when we think about restorative justice and what it means and what it looks like, not only restorative but also transformative justice, like, do people learn from the harm that they create? Do people grow from it? We have a saying called "everyone needs to grow," and I think that's a really good marker for what we mean when we talk about transformative and restorative justice. In our school system currently, a lot of schools still do zero tolerance. Sorry, they still don't really have the best markers or the best policies that help students grow from their mistakes. And a part of Black Lives Matter is turning away from this historical just really negative thing that is like we lock students away. It's the opposite of what the school to prison pipeline is. It's the opposite of prisoning and mass incarceration and all these other things you've even seen throughout the defund police movement. The idea of defunding prisons and defunding all these horrible spaces that quite frankly don't do anything for people, specifically Black people. When especially looking back at mass incarceration in the 70s and 80s. And when we think about what that looks like in our schools, we're thinking about making sure we have healing circles, making sure we talk about healing. We also have to think about how kids are not the only people doing messed up things in schools. I tell this story a lot, and it's very personal, and it's a very serious issue for me. Was in 5th grade, we had a teacher push a Black student and down the stairs just because this Black student was like having like a good day, and this teacher was having a bad one, and he was not fired for it. He was merely suspended and was paid during his suspension. And so what does restorative justice look like when teachers cause harm to students or to other staff members? And yeah, that's all I have to say about that topic. I'll give space to other folks.
I have to jump in real quick and remind people that Rainier Beach High School has restorative justice because of community activism, student activism, and educator activism, and they're using their own funds to do all the amazing things that Angelina was talking about with restorative justice. The district is not funding it. So I want to bring back attention to what Bruce said in the chat, that accountability looks like funding. There's no funding coming from the district for restorative justice. And when schools say they're doing restorative justice, don't take it as the truth, because I worked at a school, Denny International Middle School, that will tell you they do restorative justice, but I have seen where they send students who are in conflict into a meeting with a single administrator and the two students and force them to apologize to each other, send them back to class and call that restorative justice, right? So because there's no central funding from SPS, you get this weird like illusion of restorative justice. And so the schools that are doing it well are burdening that entirely on their own backs, and it's being pushed in by students and community activists.
So if I can just jump in, because that's not true for Cleveland. Seattle Public Schools is not paying for it, but it is coming out of levy dollars. And if Rena Matasia can talk about that, because it looks a lot different, and restorative justice was a part of the participatory budgeting. So I hope it does get some funds.
Rena, did you want to talk about it? You
Yeah.
don't have to, but
So I go to Cleveland High School, so we're a restorative justice high school. And I went to South Shore Pre-K 8, so like that whole time. So the jump from South Shore to Cleveland was like completely different. Because at first I was like, I've heard restorative justice, but I was like, what is it? Like when you really think about it. And then I got there, and on the first day, the circle keepers came and like explained what restorative justice was and how it works. And I was in like one or two circles, and restorative justice just makes me feel a lot safer, because when I was at my other school, a lot of times like when students would get in trouble, it would always be like, why are you not in class? Or why are you in the hallway? Or why are you always on your phone? And it was always like very hostile. But when I went to Cleveland, there wasn't really like any issues like that. And if there were, then we would go in the circle, whether that be a teacher and a teacher, or a student and a teacher, or a student and another student. And you really just get a chance to really like hash out whatever happened. And if it was really severe, then like if it was like a teacher that did something to a student, then that teacher would like be removed, or that would be handled, or whatever. But it honestly, for me personally, it really made me realize how often teachers look at Black and brown students with a presumption of guilt. And so often we're looked at as like criminals and thugs, and it always like, that's kind of how Tracy was saying earlier, like how that mentality really just like brings students down. So like when I made that switch, like from like 8th grade and elementary to high school, and I was at a restorative justice school, it made me feel a lot safer, and it made me feel like my voice mattered, and it made me feel like if there ever was a problem that I had to report, my problem would be handled properly, and I wouldn't have to be afraid of retaliation, and I wouldn't have to be afraid of principals and stuff coming after me. So I really think that restorative justice needs to be implemented in all schools immediately, because not only is it great for social and emotional learning, it gives Black and brown students a chance to actually feel safe in schools.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And I just want to add that I think restorative justice is not just about solving a problem when a conflict arises, but it's actually a whole set of practices that are put in place to build community in the first place. And part of that community has to be anti-racist principles if you're going to include everybody in the classroom, right? And so having peace circles on a regular basis in your class before a conflict arises, so you can get to know who's in your class and what's important to them and who they are and what they believe in. And then you have a space that you can use to help solve conflicts as well. And to do that properly, it has to be funded. Like Tracy said, you have to train every teacher in a building about how to use restorative practices. It can't just be bringing in one coordinator and saying that you've achieved restorative justice. And so that's really the approach we want to take, because retributive justice is the alternative. And that's retributive justice asks the questions, what rule has been broken? It says who's to blame and what punishment do they deserve? And restorative justice asks a whole different set of questions. We want to know who's been hurt and what are their needs, and what's at stake in this, and how do we heal? And I think, asking those sets of questions can help us support our youth in this struggle for a whole different kind of education system. And I don't know if there are any last burning questions, but we are coming to the end of the time.
Comment I wanted to add around that restorative justice, having that experience. Well, I've had the experience in the community some time ago when the RJOY kind of team from Oakland's model came to Seattle with Afanya Davis and others, having that more of a community experience. So I understood restorative justice from that perspective. And also an organization called One North, who's been doing restorative justice for a long time, built on the indigenous style for peace circles. But going to Mercer, well, starting in elementary at Dearborn Park and then going to Mercer, that similar to what Tracy just shared, like restorative justice was having this administrator talk to two people and move on. That is not really real. But the part that I want to highlight is that even bringing in a restorative justice model, the best model, is the culture of the school still has to be transformed. Because even in those models that they were using at both schools, it was really about getting kids to write a statement and decide how they were going to also discipline. You can get the kids to apologize, but you're also looking to see, how can I discipline you? And I looked at that as like, that's not restorative justice, because then I need to qualify. And so if the school culture doesn't value the Black lives and the brilliance and the genius of our Black students, or even our Black families, then it's just a set up for failure or disappointment on the student, and makes them walk away from that process, not wanting to engage in that process the next time. And also the power dynamics when it's a teacher-student restorative justice piece, that's not restorative justice. That students just wanting to say whatever they need to say, or not saying anything at all because they're afraid of the retaliation from the administrator or the teacher. So I just wanted to highlight that piece, that the school culture has to be willing to open itself up or be transformed to even embrace a healing or a peace circle. And having experience at Cleveland High School, coming in, working with some of the staff around learning about anti-racism, we did this little practice where we actually had the staff get to know each other. And what you found is that the staff don't even know each other. So if there's a sense of building community among students, but if the staff don't even have a sense of community, then the school culture is not going to be healthy for those students. So it goes a little bit deeper than just sitting some students down saying, you guys did this, and apologize.
Yes. Thank you so much for that. Any last student that wanted to share a thought about this movement before we sign off?
I can say something really quick. Chiwetel Ekueme again. Restorative justice circles has to be implemented into schools, because just like someone said, you can say sorry all you want. I can right now just say sorry to you. Sorry that you're listening to me. But am I really sorry? Am I really gonna change my actions to uphold my sorry? Very much actions are supposed to correlate with your words. So having all these fake restorative justice circles don't do anything. At my school, I was pushing for restorative justice. They said no, we got a peer circle. We got a peer circle. What is a peer circle? What is that? You're literally talking, apologizing, and heading to class, just like someone just said. No change is done. No change is done when you're saying sorry and you're heading right back to class. Restorative justice circles allow you to talk about the problem, get disciplined for whatever happened, and then change, because that's what we need. We need change upon the school cultures and the school districts, because sweeping everything under the rug is not okay no more. It is not okay. just like what we learned in the history books is false. And it's time for us to open our ears, open our eyes, and do something different than what we used to be doing. So restorative justice circles are very much important and very much necessary to help school culture and the students' mental health.
Thank you. Thank you. Any last youth before we sign off? If not, I have a final quote from a youth that I thought I'd leave us with. Okay. There is a youth organizer named Israel Presley. A lot of you know Israel. He was part of the NAACP Youth Council. He was a student of mine at Garfield in my world history class and in my ethnic studies class. And I interviewed him for our book, Black Lives Matter at School. And I want to just end with his words, if that's all right with folks. Israel said, "During the week of action, I learned that Blackness could be part of every subject in school. I was finally being taught things about myself. I learned about Black contributions to science in science class. I had a math teacher at Garfield who did excellent work, Miss Din. She didn't use math to talk about the negative statistics about Black people. No, she used math to talk about the possibilities that we could achieve. It felt very powerful. Black Lives Matter at School has showed us that our community can organize a fight and come together to celebrate ourselves and our accomplishments. We are no longer living in the history of defeat. We're living in a future of success." And I think that's the power of this movement, to change our schools and our students' outlook on what's possible. And I hope to see everybody at the week of events. If you go, we'll share the link to the Facebook page for the Puget Sound Black Lives Matter at School group right now. And you can find out more about all the different events that are going to be happening during the week of action at this Facebook page. And I appreciate everybody's contributions today. And I'm looking forward to reading stories in the press about these amazing young people building this struggle. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you for the week of action. And onward into the year of purpose. Peace, everybody.
Is John here?